Okay, so for today's discussion, I'll be presenting the concept of routing. So basically, since we are dealing with internet configurations or internet working, so I'm going to discuss a brief overview of, or an overview of the routing process. Okay, so basically routers plays important role on internet working because the router forwards your network traffic on the internet. So routing is the process of selecting best path in the network. Okay, so ibig sabihin, yung router daw is the one selecting what is the best path on the network or saan ba yung pinakamagandang daanan ng inyong network traffic. So that is the purpose of of a router. So aside from forwarding the traffic, it selects the best path on the network. So in the past, the term routing was also used to mean forwarding network traffic among networks. So that's one function of a router. It forwards traffic or network traffic among different networks. So however, this latter function is much better described as simply forwarding. So basically, that's the function of the router to forward your packet or your data. Okay, so IP routing defined. So just like what I mentioned on previously, that your computers or servers, which is part of an internet or the internet infrastructure, should have public IP address. And how do your computers, let's say sa mga bahay nyo, will be able to find those servers on the internet infrastructure? So basically, doon pumapasok yung routing. So internet is comprised of so many routers which routes or forwards your traffic to different networks and to different portions of the internet. Okay, so the routing of data packets from one network segment to another, for example, from one subnet to another subnet. Okay, so basically, we've already dealt with the classful IP addressing class A, class B, class C. But we on other lesson, I'm going to discuss subnetting. So we're going to produce a smaller network out of a classful IP addressing. Okay, so we're going to make the a classful, let's say class C, into multiple subnetworks for you to be able to produce different IP addressing. Okay, so basically that's also part of the router's function to forward your packet from one subnet to another subnet or from one network to another network. Okay, and a router or a gateway is often involved in the routing process. Usually, your
Usually the configuration of your computer, the IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway, and the default gateway is your router's IP. So this is where your network traffic is being forwarded to your destination. Okay, since the destination is not part of your local area network, so the router's function is to forward your network traffic outside of your local area network and to reach your destination. The routing method. So the first one is the static routing. So remote networks are manually entered into the routing table using static routes. So basically, the configuration is manual or static.
yung static routing, the administrator configures the static route or kung saan siya talaga dadaan lang. Okay, so that is static routing. You define the path of the route, and uh, that route which is defined is entered into the routing table or parang record niya on the router na dito ka dapat dumaan. Okay, so that's static routing. So you configure the path or where are the paths na dito lang dadaan yung network traffic mo. Unlike with the dynamic routing, so we have the dynamic routing, remote routes are automatically learned using dynamic routing protocol. Okay? So with the dynamic routing, administrator configure the router using dynamic routing protocol, which will be discussed on other lesson. So the purpose of dynamic routing is that every time there are changes or there are, let's say for example, there's a problem with a link, a specific link or path on the network. So basically, it will look for another path na pwedeng daanan ng inyong network. It automatically defines path on the network or basically the best path on the network. And that is through routing protocol. Unlike with the static route is fixed. So this is the route depends on how administrator configured the route. Unlike with the dynamic routing, since it uses dynamic routing protocol or a configuration which allows routers to determine other paths on the network. Okay, or an option or path on the network. Okay, advantages of static routing. It uses minimal CPU or memory overhead. So sa routers, we have CPU, we have the CPU also and memory. In terms of static routing, since you only input a specific path, so basically, yun lang yung naka-record on the router or the routing table. So basically, the entries on the routing table is very minimal because it only reflects or the entries are only those who are configured using static routing. So valid overhead updates are not shared between routers. Okay? So since static routing is fixed, so basically the routers does not need to learn or to update. Kasi sa route, if on a network or internet network, there are routers connected to one another. Sa static routing, the router does not need to learn any changes on the other routers. So meaning to say, it will not consume bandwidth. So what is being configured on the router is fixed. Okay? Any changes on the network, walang pakialam si router. So basically, lahat ng inputs lang on the routing table using static route or manual route, yun lang yung naka-record on the routing table. Okay? So, advantage also is granular control on how traffic is routed. So basically, you have the full control where the network traffic will be directed. Okay? So as an administrator, you have the full control on where the route will go. Okay? But there are also drawbacks or disadvantage of static routing. So first is human error. Okay? If a particular configuration is nagkamali, syempre the route will not be able to yung pinaka-route, yung pinakadadaanan ng traffic nyo, network traffic nyo, will baka your destination will not be reachable because of a human error configuration. So next is infrastructure changes must be manually adjusted. So the problem is, yun nga, routers does not learn any changes on other routers. So basically, if there should be changes on the infrastructure, you have to reconfigure the routers para, let's say for example, nag-add ka ng router and that router will be part of the static route. So the problem is you have to reconfigure the routers na nauna for those routers to know that there is an existing new route or new router on the network. Okay, so next is no dynamic fault tolerance if a link goes down. Okay, since you only define a static route. If that link fails, so baka wala ka ng other link na pwedeng daanan on your network traffic. So that is the problem with static routing. So if there's an available link but it is not yet configured, so hindi pa rin siya gagana. So you have to configure the other possible route kapag nawala yung existing route na kinonfigure mo using manual static route. Okay? So next is administrative overhead. So it requires continuous configuration, manual configuration. So there's an administrative overhead, or you always have to reconfigure again if there will be changes to the infrastructure. Okay, another disadvantage is it is impractical on large network. Okay, so it's impractical on large network. Just like what I mentioned, that any changes on the infrastructure, there should be manual update on the configuration of other routers. Okay, so that's too impractical on very large network. Let's say if you have so many routers on the internet or the network, at magdadagdag ka and you need to configure those routers again because you only add one router because that will be part of the static route. So basically that is a little bit impractical on very large network. Okay, advantage of dynamic routing. So basically it's simpler to configure on larger networks. Okay, because if any changes on the network, let's say you add a router, so basically other routers will update themselves with uh with the with the update on the infrastructure. So meaning to say it automatically learns that there are reconfiguration on the network. So that is yun nga so it uses higher CPU and memory utilization on the network and also bandwidth because from time to time when there's an update or basically from time to time the routers learn if there are updates on the infrastructure. Okay? So the simpler to configure on larger networks. So mas madali siya kasi if there will be changes on the infrastructure, routers update themselves with the update on the infrastructure. Okay? So next is will dynamically choose a different or better route if a link goes down. Okay? So basically, the dynamic route configuration allows the router to select the best path. Okay? So basically, it will look for the best path on the network, especially if the link goes down. For example, uh, uh, okay. For example, this is your computer and this is your destination. So the best path as of the moment is the path sa taas. Okay? So sa path sa taas. So basically, let's say the path sa taas uh, or the direction sa taas has a has a faster link and has a stable or reliable link. So basically, ito yung gagamitin niya when these routers are configured with dynamic routing. Okay? So, what if naputol tong link na to? So, the link between the two routers. So, if that is a static route, you have to configure other routes. For example, sa baba, if that is static route, You have to manually configure it if that route does not exist. If that route exists. So that is the problem with static routing. Unlike with the dynamic, when a link fails automatically without having administrator's intervention, so basically you are able to route your network traffic to other best path on the network. Okay, so that is dynamic routing. It will dynamically choose a different or better route if a link goes down. Okay, so next is ability to load balance between multiple links. So since nade-detect niya which is the more reliable or the best path on the network, so basically it can load balance. For example, masyadong overloaded na yung path sa taas. So the dynamic route configuration allows the path to be selected based on its quality of link. Okay? Kung masyado nang overloaded sa taas, ibabato nyo muna on other path. So that's ability to load balance between multiple links. Okay, disadvantages of static routing. So updates are shared between routers, thus consuming bandwidth. Routing protocols put an additional load on router CPU and RAM. So just like what I've said kanina, that dynamic routing updates each and every routers with changes on their configuration automatically. Okay, or the infrastructure, if an infrastructure changes, the router updates the routing table from time to time, and when with that, it consumes bandwidth and also it consumes router's CPU and memory. Okay, next is the choice of the best route is in the hand of the routing protocol and not the network administrator. Okay, so the disadvantage is the best route is selected using the routing protocol. So there are a different dynamic routing protocol configuration, and basically the selection of the best path will be based on the protocol na ginamit. Okay, so there are different considerations kung bakit yun yung nasa-select the best path on the network, and that is based on the routing protocol. So let's say, for example, the reliability, the bandwidth speed, and the combination of other uh, quality of the link. So that is based on the protocol na ginamit on the dynamic routing. Static routing tables are hand-maintained on each router. So the record or the list of different routes on the network or the infrastructure will be based on or the entries on the routing table is hand maintained on each router. So basically, since that is manually configured, so basically you that's a hand maintained or hand or configured manually on the router. So unlike with dynamic routing tables are dynamically maintained by the routing protocol. An example is the RIP, OSPF, ISIS, IGRP, EIGRP. So I'll be discussing that on other topic. Especially you'll be encountering that sa laboratory. You're going to configure different routing protocols on Cisco Packet Tracer. Okay, these are examples of entries in a routing table. So, ito yung laman ng routing table. So, these are the details. Basically, the routing table holds the information of the possible network addresses existing on the infrastructure para alam niya na where do your network traffic will be forwarded. Okay? So, isipin nyo lang that the routing table holds the different information of routers and network addresses on a network infrastructure. Okay, and part of the entries in the routing table are the network ID or the network address, network or subnet mask, the next hop or the gateway address or the IP of the gateway, the interface or the network interface for forwarding the data packet. So this is the link where kung saan manggagaling yung or mafo-forward yung network traffic or your packet or your data packet, and the metric cost of each route for the selection of the best hop. Pag sinabi nating metric, this is the measurement on how the quality of a link or on the network infrastructure or the network on the network segment. So this allows the selection of the best hop. Pag sinabi ni best hop or pinaka magandang dadaanan or the next best router na pwedeng daanan ng inyong packet. So that is what we call as the metric, the quality of the route. This is an example of the routing table of a host. So basically, these are examples kung ano yung nasa routing table. So it includes the network address, net mask, network subnet mask, the gateway address, the interface, and the metric. Okay, these are the information on the routing table. So basically, it holds different network addresses. So basically, these are the network addresses that can be found on the network infrastructure. Okay, with the subnet mask, gateway address, interface, and metric. Okay, so that is the basic of the that's the concept of the routing process. So that's how routers are configured. So we have static and dynamic configuration. Okay, so those two are different configurations, and you're going to do that sa laboratory activity natin sa Cisco Packet Tracer. Okay, so that will be all for my discussion for today. So basically, after this, kindly check your assessment task pertaining to this lesson.